how different Iran was to India when you were going around the country and seeing the status of various crafts and the possibilities of reviving them. How did you find the situation?
Well, the thing is that they had already started when we arrived. And in developing, they had already set up their handicrafts center. In fact, one of their officials had come to India, and I had helped in training him here in India to set up their handicrafts center. And they had a wonderful designer, Narogi, who did a lot of work, and Mrs. Jaganigi, she was working in the handicraft center earlier, and then later on I think she was ousted because of being a Zoroastrian or whatever. And then when they set up the rural, what is called non-farm development center, then Mrs. Jaganigi was appointed the director because she was very knowledgeable. Now that was what I went to advise them on in 1970. Because as I mentioned earlier, that land reform for the first time was initiated by the Shah in Iran, and that affected the lives of all the cottage industries people, all the landless people, all the horticulture people, the animal husbandry people, because the farmers who were farming for the families, they got land, but these people did not get land because they were not farming the land. They were working either on providing services or they were landless labor. With the result that large migrations of these people who were thrown out of employment took place from the villages into the main cities, and it created a lot of problems in the rural areas, in the small provincial towns, and also in large cities, where people came looking for work. So they decided that they had to do something for the cottage industries and for the rural non-farm employment area, and I went for that purpose. And so these were mostly cottage industries and handicrafts and handlooms which were to be done in the rural areas. And as I mentioned to you that the first place we did was home, and then I selected 4 different geoclimatic and socio-economic areas, regions, to carry out the study. One was Baluchistan, the desert area that I was describing to you. Another one was Kurdistan, and which is a mountain area, and then the other one was Azerbaijan, which was rich fruit, vegetables, and also had a lot of tribal people. And the other one was the Mardasht area, which is the old Persepolis area, and which also was the center for the migration of the large migrations of the Kashkais from the southern part. It was for me a very rich experience.
And each of these 4 areas had a different craft?
They had a range of crafts, you see. And the biggest, of course, was carpet making. And each region, each tribe, each section of a tribe had their own designs and patterns and, rich. Now, they had the Iranian carpet company, which was government run. And their role really was that they kept a balance of wages which these people would give out. Otherwise, the middlemen would, exploit them, as it happened in India. So, so they had structures. They were interested. They were developing their crafts already when I arrived there, and we started expanding and going into the rural areas which were not covered. So we carried out studies, like for instance in Kurdistan, there were 4 districts, and we carried out studies in the 4 different districts, and they had specialties, like the Kurdistan area, one area, and they were known and famous for their work. So we worked, and they also made beautiful kilns, which was without what do you call it? Without tufts.
Okay.
And so people didn't value them, but they were beautiful. They were known as the Bijari kilns, and they were lovely. And so we collected them. We had a small exhibition, and we encouraged people, and their value went up tremendously because of that. So
you had the full support of the government and
absolutely, absolutely. The Shah Banu especially. She
Queen.
was very, very interested in the crafts, and in fact, for their coronation, she had beautiful Baluchi embroidery done on the robes that she wore. She wore turquoise, because turquoise was their stone, which came from Khorasan area, so it had a very, very rich culture, very rich tradition. And I remember when I arrived, I already had one friend.
Okay.
I had met this woman, Mariam Matan Daftari. She was her father-in-law was a member of parliament, had been president for a while. Her husband, Hidayat Matan Daftari, was the grandson of Musaddiq.
Okay.
And so he was persona non grata because he was, a follower of Musaddiq.
Yeah.
And I knew his wife. I met her here. She had come to Delhi, and so when I arrived, I already knew an Iranian, a highly cultivated culture person. And through them, I met a lot of very, very interesting Iranian people. And I made a tremendous effort because I felt that the origins of our crafts and of our culture and our tradition lay in Iran.
Okay.
So I made a tremendous effort to learn the language. And I speak it fluently. I'm very proud of that. And you see,
you also learned to cook the food.
Yes, the food was delicious. And each region there had a different cuisine. Now, the fact that I made a tremendous effort to learn the language made me loved by the people, because all the other UN people who'd been there for 10 years or 12 years, never bothered. And there were a lot of Indians also working in the UN. They would just hang around with each other, and they would be very snobbish, and they would make fun of me and say, oh, she only mixes with the Iranians, she doesn't talk to us. Well, I said, if I wanted to mix with the Indians, I could have stayed back home in India. I've come here to learn about the culture, and I wanted very much. And it was to learn about the culture, and what better way than this. The other thing which Iran did for me was that I found myself. You see, in your own country, you are accepted as you are, of course, but the minute you open your mouth, they know they can fit you in
a box.
In a box. She's been convent educated. Oh, I see. She's comes from the well-to-do family. She's from the privileged class. And all my life, I have been trying to break out of that. That's why I think I joined the Students' Federation, the Communist Party, because I thought I must break that. I wanted to be one with the marginalized people, but I could not be despite all my efforts in India. But when I went to Iran, nobody knew me. Nobody knew my background.
Yeah.
Nobody knew my family. Here, such a small world, though it's a huge country and a big population, somebody or the other always knows who you are and where you come from. In Iran, nobody knew me. I just had one friend, and that was Iranian friend, and that was Mariam. And there they accepted me for what I was. And from the craftsmen who came from the villages, who became my friends, and it was so amazing and so wonderful for me that they would come from the village, just like in India, they would come straight to me. They wouldn't go to their Iranian, officials, they would come to me. And the driver who belonged to that organization who used to drive me around was my friend. He used to on Sundays bring his son to come and play with my son, And so I knew the Queen, her cousin, Bijan Safari, great artist, architect, theatre person, who advised her on all cultural, who was, like we have the same thing, that your mother's brother is like a surrogate father for you. So he was her cousin from the mother's side.
Okay.
She had lost her father when she was a young girl, Shabana, Farah, Diba. And so she'd been brought up by her uncle. And Bijan, the most extraordinary person, Safari, was her cultural advisor. And he became one of my closest friends.
Okay.
So I I knew him, I knew the master craftsman, I knew Agai Ramazani, who was my driver, who became my friend. So from the top to the bottom, from the Queen, and the first time I met the Queen, I was introduced to her by one of my friends and said, she speaks Persian. And the Queen was French speaking because she was studying Beaux-Arts in Paris. And so she started talking to me in Farsi, and I felt very embarrassed because there are 3 levels of Persian, as you know. One is the one which is the Tarufi, which is the one which you speak in the court language. Then the other is the intellectual, and also the ones that the elite speak. And the third is the Luti, the common language. And so I only learned while I was doing my research by talking to the villagers. So I said to her, Your Highness, I don't know how to speak Persian. Please don't speak to me. I'm very embarrassed. They're all looking so shocked when I'm talking to you. So she was laughing. She was so tickled that she was hearing the people's language from me. And she would insist on speaking to me. And we became good friends.
Okay.
You know. So, I mean, that was for me my dream. That I was accepted for myself, not from what I came from or my family or anything. And I met some extraordinary people there, and I also worked with the craftsmen, and they, and I had wonderful designers, researchers, a team of nearly 12 people with whom I carried out surveys and studies all over Iran. I know Iran. Even today I can say I know Iran like the back of my hand, as I knew India, because I traveled the length and the breadth of Iran.
And you also did some publications on
Yes,
Iran.
I wrote 3 books.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite book, which came out after I left, was Living Cultural Tradition of Iran, which is up there, you can see it. Yes. And it was a book which was written with a lot of love and passion for the beauty of Iran, and you know, and it was the living culture of Iran that I was fortunate to come to know. It became like a second home for me.
You were there for how many years?
I was there for 7 years.
7 years.
And in fact, so much so that my son, the first part when I went, he was very small. He was 3 years old. But when I went back again, he came with me. And he also learned about the culture and the traditions, and he was also enriched. And he speaks Persian too.
Okay.
You know,
he went to school
and he was with me, and we traveled together, and he went to school there, etc. So Iran had a range of crafts, and it also had, because it was at the crossroads, you know, a lot of pride in their own language, great love for their literature, their own language. You know, my friend Hidayat Matan Daftari, who was Sadiq's grandson, was sent to school, Harrow or whatever it is, that
private school,
snobbish English school, as a child of 12 years old. And then he went to university there. And when he came back, the newspaper that he read, to feel that he had read the newspaper, was a Persian newspaper. Because he had the great love for all of them, they all knew Persian. They all knew Persian poetry. They were great. We, you know, every evening, whenever we met together, it used to be wonderful. Not a foolish evenings that you spend here talking, gossiping, and things like that. They would recite poetry. Somebody would pave the tar and sing Jalaluddin Rumi's Masnavi. Then they would, you know, smoke a pipe of opium, and it was not the kind of opium that people talk of, you know, like the Chinese, which knocks you out. It had a kind of, it opened your sensibilities, you know. It was, they would call it wafur. It had a long pipe, and it was a very mild. You got more of a kick from whiskey, which everybody imbibes here all the time. Then you got from that smoking the wafur. And it had a whole culture. In the well-to-do places, they would have a room that they would build, in which they would have, you know, cushions laid out, and then mangal, which was the beautiful brass fireplace with live coal burning, and you sat around, and the samovar with the tea brewing and sugar, and people would recite poetry, would sing music, and it was like as if you really entered their inner life. And they would talk about their dreams, and it would be that they wanted to be a poet, but how they had to become an engineer. Somebody wanted to be a doctor, but her parents forced her to an early marriage. You know, it was
life.
Because I learned the language. These people accepted me, and I sat in their homes and shared it. And what was so wonderful was, like for instance, I did a study of Khorasan. Khorasan is, you've been to Khorasan. Khorasan is the place where some of the best fruits and grapes come, as well as the saffron comes there.
Okay.
That saffron is better than the Kashmiri saffron. And so I made a study of Birjan district, which was between Baluchistan and northern Khorasan, which was extremely agriculturally rich. Birjan was in between the desert and so it had a mixed and there I learned something extremely interesting, and that study of mine, the study of Birjan, became a well-known study of the culture of poverty. And because it had 13 years of drought, and there was no irrigation system. So for 13 years, it was the crafts on which they survived. And the crafts were practiced by the women. Now, they also had a survey, like we have, a survey of India, of the population. So in that, they would say, head of the family, he's agriculturist. A woman, housewife. So she was not.
Looked at her.
But that woman was the mainstay of the family because she did crafts, and crafts didn't feature in the survey study. And so our study, which we did with these young students from the Tehran University, economists, two young women and men, we discovered that families were maintained by the crafts, carpet weaving, cloth weaving, wood carving, basket making, mat weaving, and a whole range of crafts which they practiced. And people were astonished. And that was wonderful. It was quoted all over. And it made me feel good because, they were neglected. So then the next thing that they did was ask me to go to Baluchistan. And because that conditions were even worse then. Baluchistan was absolutely a drought-prone area, permanent, with only small oases and then desert people, nomadic people. And so, it also enriched me because the thing is that my work in handicrafts over here and handlooms was limited to the lines that were drawn by the planning commission and by the bureaucratic. But there, because I came from outside, there was no program or anything. I could build
You had a lot more freedom.
A whole program. So when I made these changes made them think. This was then, and through this work of mine, I shared it with the anthropologists, and they called it Mardum Shanasi. You know, Mardum is men, Shanasi is knowledge of men, anthropology. So they had a department in the Tehran University.
You taught at the university.
And I also taught there. That was later I taught in the Danishgai-Farabi, which is the art and culture. But these people said to me, you come and lecture to our MA students of anthropology. Because what you have studied is very important. And so it became part of the curriculum of the anthropology. And there was this fantastic man, Nader Afshar Nadri. He was a descendant of Nader Shah.
Okay.
And you know, when he came to visit here, I told him, don't tell anybody because we hate Nader Shah. About it, so he says, you see, I didn't dare mention my ancestry. He was an anthropologist. Then there's his wife, who was Colombian and who joined him. They met in Paris when she was 16. She was an anthropologist. All the anthropologists, Rahul Nini was an anthropologist, they all picked up on my research and made me come and teach. There was this man who did wonderful work, Khusru Khusravi, another anthropologist who, poor fellow, languished in prison during the Shah's time and during Khomeini's time. Khusru Khusravi, who was a very, very good friend of mine and whom I met again in Central Asia when they were doing work, when I was doing work on the Silk Route. I worked for 3 years in the rural non-farm employment sector, and then I came back to India.
That was in 78?
That was, no, I went there in 1970. 3 years, then I came back, you know, when we had that war with Bangladesh. And I felt very guilty that I wasn't here. Everybody else, you know, everybody was missing a meal.
Raising money.
Giving money because of all the refugees, you know, 1 million refugees had come. And I felt, my God, look at me earning money, because, you know, I used to be paid what I would get in 1 month there was what I would get in India for a year. So I gave up my job and I came back. Everybody thought I was cuckoo. Came back and joined the All India Handicrafts Board and worked here. But unfortunately, I got so used to being so free when I was working in Iran that I refused to accept the bureaucratic norms and had a fight with the minister. And after 19 years of service in the government of India, I threw in my resignation. And everybody said, wait for another year, then you'll be entitled to pension. I said, I can't take it. I can't be insulted by maybe a minister, you know, and so on and so forth. So I resigned. And then they got another job and they said they only wanted me back. They didn't want anybody else, which was for the handicrafts development in Iran. You see, the first one was rural non-farm employment, which was in the rural area. The second one was the urban crafts, which was handicrafts. So they said, we don't want anybody, we just want her.
So you went back in?
So I went back to Iran and I did my work there in you know, in that whole area. And then after 2 years, the contract was over and I was then offered a job by a new university of art and culture called Danishgai-Farabi as advisor on Asian art and culture and on applied arts to help to build up. So for 1 year, I helped them to build up their curriculum and worked in the university. And that's also when I wrote, you know, my first book was, I had already written which was that I mentioned to you, then I wrote
Living
another
traditions. No,
living cultural tradition. My second book, unfortunately, got lost, which was on Turkoman tribe.
Okay.
Because when I did that book and it was finished and about to be brought out, they were just waiting to be bound when the revolution happened.
Okay.
And Khomeini came in and they destroyed everything.
Oh.
And so I felt that that book was really lost in a way, and I don't even have a copy.
You didn't.
And I tried very hard to track that book. But there was also other publications which, on Kalamkar and so on and so forth. So we did a lot of work, and I encouraged a lot of people to do research and so on. And
you left Iran then when the revolution started.
So actually, the thing is that what happened was that in 1978, when I was working with the Danishgai Farabi, I wasn't getting much of a salary from them, and I decided that I would, that I really needed a little change. But I hated to leave Iran. It was part of my life. But it was hard. Himan was a child who was growing up. And, he was with me, he was being educated. And the cost of living in Iran was pretty high and the salary was pretty low. And in the meantime, I got the offer from the International Labour Organization to head a Pan-African organization for employment of women in for African countries, to work linked with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa.
Okay.
So I would cover the whole of Africa, and it was, quite a fantastic job. And everybody said to me, all my friends said to me, "You stupid, don't refuse this job. This is a fantastic job, and the amount you will learn." And then I told them that I'm leaving, and Shabano then requested me. She said, "Don't go. What is it? You want money? We'll give you what the UN is going to give you. You want a house in Isfahan? We'll give you a house in Isfahan.
Okay.
You whatever you want, we'll give you. You want to go to Africa? I'll send you for 3 months to Africa." So I don't know how good sense prevailed, because there was no question at that time about the revolution and Khomeini coming back or any such thing. And I said to her, "You see, it's a different thing if you send me. But if I'm working there, give me 2 years, let me sign that I'll come back, and I'll come back enriched and I'll work with you." But I said, "Don't forget all those promises that you're making to me, but I will go."
Yeah.
So I decided to come, to go to Africa. But Africa was Addis Ababa,
Okay.
Ethiopia.
Based there.
That was the headquarters.
Okay.
And Ethiopia had gone through a revolution too, and there was this red terror, and there were people being killed, and so on. And so, I also felt, let me go there. Right? I told them, let me go and first find out if I can handle that and live there, because if people are being killed all over the place, I can't take it. I don't want to go there. So in August, it's so funny, my birthday is in August, and every time on my birthday, things happen.
Okay.
Like, and this is August, I went to Africa. I went to Addis Ababa. I spent 3 weeks there. And I discovered that it was fine. and I could manage, But it was still a little, difficult area, So, but I decided I was going to take this. This was a huge challenge. It was quite extraordinary. I didn't know one single person.
Okay, in Africa.
In Africa. Iran, I knew my friends were head of the United Nations, the Shalons. Mariam Matindaftre, I knew at least somebody would hear. I didn't know anybody. But I decided I was going to come there. So I came, but I took 1 month off to have a holiday in Europe before going. So what I did was I packed up my bags, and through Lufthansa, they were going to fly them to Addis Ababa, but I said I was only going to reach there in November, so this was in September. So I said, don't send it to me till December, keep it in storage and I'll pay for it. Because I didn't want to arrive there before I arrived.
Yeah.
And after I left, already the Shah left, then Khomeini came, the revolution took place, and my stuff remained
in Tehran.
Oh. But luckily in the godown of Lufthansa, so nobody touched it. But I thought I had lost everything. All my collection of carpets, all my beautiful collection of stuff from India, and everything I thought was lost and gone forever. In 1978, November, I arrived in Addis Ababa.
And you came alone to Africa? You didn't bring Himan with you?
No. Himan had in the meantime gone to boarding school in Mayo College because it was totally new. I didn't know, and the conditions were such I couldn't have sent him to school there. And so I arrived there, and on my way I got news that I lost my mother.
Yes.
As I mentioned to you, and I never came home which was terrible. But the challenge of the job was there. I covered 21 African countries, and in the beginning it was very hard because Africans don't care for Indians. The Indians had supported the apartheid and had tried to identify themselves, except in South Africa, and they were part of the entire movement, and a few people in Kenya, but otherwise they didn't care for the Indians, or they were exploited. So the first reaction of the Africans to me was,
We don't like you.
Not like me, but keep her at a distance. But slowly, when they found that I was really, really interested in the work, in my work, and identified myself, and I made friends with them, and I would invite them over to my house and cook them Indian food, and go to their homes and taste their food, and so on and so forth. We became friends. They accepted me. In fact, when I left Africa, I had set up, with the help of other African people, what was called an International African Cultural Center. And we used to every fortnight meet. And because there were people from all over Africa, and everybody had to present the food, the culture, and so on and so forth that we had. And so these people gave me a farewell, and they said, the real African in our midst is leaving us today, which was coming from them, a great compliment. Anyway, this African, from 1978 November, I was there till 1982.
Okay. And the work you did in Africa was similar then to the work you'd been doing?
Yes, similar and yet different.
Okay.
Because you
The
see,
crafts are always
though I was supposed to be working on the socio-economic and employment of women in cottage industries and small-scale industries, they did not have a program for small-scale and cottage industries. So I had to work on developing in the different states with their planning commission for socio-economic and as well as the employment for women as well as men. Because if you don't have a program, then where is the, and the place they were, that I found fascinating, where I was able to do a lot of work, was strangely enough, Somalia.
Okay.
Somalia was a very difficult place to work in. It was known as the graveyard of the UN projects. 2 projects which worked were set up for women. One was with the Somalian Women's Association, that's thanks to them, the Somalian. And another one was also weaving technologies in Somalia.
Which you set up?
We set up
Okay.
2 of them because that was successful. The other place where it was very successful was in Botswana. Botswana was an extraordinarily interesting place. They worked modestly and they did an excellent job. And we set up a project over there which worked very well, which was originally started by the Swedish, development agency, and then taken up by the UN to process the local wool and to make beautiful hangings of the life of the people. They didn't have a tradition of weaving, and that was a great success. And the other one, 2 projects that were successful was in Ethiopia. And the one was the project which was for pottery makers. And they were the Guragis, who the tradition is that they came from India.
Okay.
Because the first century AD book Peripulus of the Erythraean Sea compares that India and Eritrea are the same.
Okay.
This is a Roman Greek, Roman-Greco book of travel.
Okay.
And there is a close link between Eritrea and Ethiopia and India.
Okay.
And the Guragis were the potters. They were supposed to be magicians, like Indians are supposed to be. And they were also marginalized and they lived on the edge of the society. So we had a pottery thing, and we did a very interesting study of a fiber that was insect, it was known as. It was the false banana. It looked like a banana, but it was not edible banana. What you ate were the fibers, and so that could give to the poorest of the poor in a small piece of land enough food for them to survive. It's insect. It's every part of that thing used to the fibers were used to, the sap was used, the leaves were used for cooking, just like we use the banana. And then there was also another weaving project and another potter another project for them for embroidery. Very interesting was pottery in Africa is done by the women. Weaving is done by the men. And this is based upon the cultural belief that woman preserves the seed of man. Therefore, she does the pottery.
Okay.
Man protects, so he does hunting and he protects the human race by creating the cloth from the elements, you know. And also the roof of the house and the house,
the shelter.
The shelter.
Yeah.
The just like in Kutch, the bunga, the rounded hut, is made by the women, the rounded hut.
Yes.
The roof is put in by the men.
Okay.
But that the clay roof is created for preserving the seed of man, you know. So in the same way now, but typical European attitudes, pottery is done by men, weaving is done by women. So when I arrived there, they had already employed my assistant, and she'd already started weaving, because she was herself a weaver and she was Scandinavian, weaving for women and pottery for men. And I had a very hard time to change the thing around, because they would come to the place to study because they would get money, but they wouldn't study because pottery, because they said if a man touches the wheel, or they didn't have a wheel.
Okay.
They didn't have a wheel.
The coil.
And then if they start making pottery and this thing, he would become impotent.
Oh, okay.
And if the woman wove, her threads would break. You know, so not understanding the culture, but imposing their own ideas and concepts was one of the big problems in Africa that I had to face. So, you know, when I spoke to the African men who were the planners, they understood, because they were very deeply rooted in their tradition, you know, and so they understood what I was talking, you know, and we were able to swing things around. The place which I adored and loved very much was West Africa.
Okay.
Rich in culture, and in crafts, you know. And I made wonderful friends there, who are my friends even till today. The other place where I was very, very impressed was Tunisia.
Okay.
Superb, fantastic, with great sensitivity to tradition and to their culture, and you know, and the projects, and very, very good projects in weaving of carpets, as well as Bedouin jewelry. Fabulous. That way, we did some work with the Bedouins over there, you know, in Egypt also. And then the other place was Algeria.
Okay.
They're fantastic ceramics done by the women.
Okay.
You see, it was very funny. No man could touch, and they used to go down into the earth, the women, to get the earth naked. Because we are entering the womb of Mother Earth, we had to go naked. They would go naked to dig the earth, bring it out, and prepare it. But firing was done by the men, because that was dealing with the fire. And so women who were not reached menopause were not allowed to come anywhere near the firing, because they said the pots will crack. Because the women have the fault is the crack. And I thought to myself, if they didn't have that crack, where would the human race come from? And you know, so I really, North Africa was wonderful, very sensitive, wonderful people. I mean, very good friends.
And then you left Africa in 80?
Well, and you know, the other place which I wanted to mention, which I liked very much was in Ethiopia. There is one center where they weave very, very fine cotton, like our muslin with a border, in white. And Ethiopians generally wear white. And you know, in the Ajanta caves, in one of the big murals, you see the king and dancers with ringlets and white. They are Ethiopian dancers. And that's 7th century AD. So we had this contact with Africa.
Yeah.
So, I mean, 21 countries. I knew the ABC of the travel better than travel because I was running all over the place to cover 21 countries. And they called me the crazy Indian woman.
You never got exhausted.
With love.